For centuries, science has become powerful by cutting reality into smaller and smaller pieces. Atoms, genes, neurons, data. But there is a question the knife cannot answer by itself. When every part has been measured, have we understood the whole? This is not an argument against science, and it is not evidence that ancient philosophy secretly predicted modern physics. It is a more difficult question. Can we build a bridge between the mechanisms we can measure and the meanings by which we choose to live? On one shore are mathematics, physical models, measurement, and evidence. On the other are questions about origin, experience, responsibility, and a meaningful life. A bridge does not prove that two shores are the same place. It respects the distance between them while making careful passage possible. That is the final vision of the wisdom bridge. Not a formula that explains everything, a better way to ask what our explanations leave outside the frame. Modern science owes much of its success to reduction. Matter was separated into molecules, atoms, and smaller constituents. Living systems were examined through organs, cells, genes, proteins, and electrical signals. Without this disciplined separation, there would be no modern medicine, semiconductor industry, spaceflight, or information revolution as we know them. The problem is not that the knife is wrong. The problem begins when we assume that it is the only instrument we need. A musical note can be represented by frequency, amplitude, and duration. A digital file may preserve every sample of a symphony, but a list of samples is not the experience of hearing the music. Imagine pressing a magnifying glass against a vast painting. You may identify the exact chemistry of one red pigment and still fail to notice that the painting depicts a sunset. Nothing in the pigment analysis is false. What disappears is the relationship that becomes visible only when we step back. Reduction can be exact at one level and incomplete at another. A neuron can be described through voltage and synaptic transmission, but the suffering of a person is not located inside one neuron. It involves a body, a history, an environment, relationships, and a mind attempting to understand what is happening. The parts remain real, but patterns also become legitimate objects of investigation. This is not a rejection of reductionism, it is a change in zoom. Place several metronomes on a shared, movable platform. At first, each one ticks at its own rhythm, but every movement shifts the platform slightly, and that motion affects the others. Over time, a common rhythm can emerge without a conductor. No single metronome contains the collective rhythm. The order belongs to the interaction. The future of science may depend not only on discovering smaller components, but on learning how descriptions at different scales constrain one another. How do local interactions form stable patterns? How do systems maintain coherence while matter and energy pass through them? The microscope remains essential, but beside it, science also needs a telescope for patterns. PTQ enters this discussion as a possible language of projection. It asks whether the reality available to measurement might be understood as a stable slice produced by deeper geometric relations. PTQ is used here as a research lens, not as an established theory of everything. Projection does not mean that the visible world is unreal. Consider an architectural floor plan. It is real, precise, and useful. Builders can use it to locate walls, avoid structural columns, and organize a room. But if we conclude that the building has only length and width because the plan does, we have confused a useful representation with the complete structure. A description may be reliable within its purpose, while remaining incomplete beyond it. The visible world does not become false. The claim is only that a successful representation should not automatically be mistaken for the whole of reality. Observable does not automatically mean complete. Measurable does not automatically mean exhaustive. Modeled does not automatically mean final. These statements do not weaken science. Every successful model draws a boundary around what it explains and reveals new questions beyond that boundary. The modern world was built through control. We learned to control fire, engines, electricity, chemical reactions, and information. Control created extraordinary abundance. But complex systems do not simply obey, they respond. A thermostat changes a room. A factory changes a river. An algorithm changes what people notice, which changes what they believe, which changes the data the algorithm receives next. The intervention returns to the intervener. That is feedback. Complex crises differ in their causes, but they repeatedly show that optimizing one variable can destabilize the system that made the success possible. Control is a capability. Wisdom is the ability to understand what the capability returns. This becomes especially important with artificial intelligence. AI is often imagined either as an obedient tool or as a future mind that suddenly awakens. But its most immediate power lies somewhere less dramatic. AI is an amplifier. Consider a recommendation system optimized only to keep people engaged. It does not need anger, ideology, or an intention of its own. If fear, outrage, and conflict hold attention longer, the system can learn to distribute more of them. The danger is not that the machine hates us. The danger is that it can execute a narrow human objective with enormous efficiency, while the social cost remains outside the metric. The system succeeds at the target, the environment absorbs the consequence. AI does not need to become conscious to transform civilization. It only needs to make existing incentives faster, cheaper, and more scalable. If institutions reward extraction and concentrated control, AI can increase their efficiency. If they reward transparency, cooperation, correction, and shared benefit, AI can strengthen those capacities instead. This is an ethical and institutional choice, not a proven law of physics. The machine reflects the objective we give it. Then, at scale, the reflection begins to reshape us. A mature civilization must therefore ask more than, can this system achieve the target? It must also ask, what behavior does the target reward? What feedback will return? Who absorbs the failure? And what kind of human being will this technology train us to become? Eventually, every bridge between science and wisdom returns to a personal question. Who am I inside this vast system? In a completely mechanical picture of existence, a human life can appear to be a brief chemical event in an indifferent darkness. But the opposite reaction can be equally misleading. We may tell ourselves that consciousness is unlimited, that thought directly commands reality, or that every event was created for our spiritual development. Neither extreme respects reality. If thought alone commanded the world, suffering would become an accusation against the person who suffers. War, illness, and loss could be dismissed as failures of belief or spiritual frequency. That is not wisdom. It confuses psychological agency with physical causation and replaces compassion with blame. We are not meaningless because we are small, and we are not omnipotent because we are conscious. There is a third possibility. We live within conditions we did not choose, with information that will always remain incomplete. Yet within those limits, our responses still matter. You cannot choose every storm. You can adjust a sail. You cannot know every motive. You can choose not to deceive. You cannot control the entire system. You can become a more reliable node within it. When pain or conflict reaches us, we may not control its arrival, but we can sometimes decide whether it becomes the next person's pain. We can repeat the reaction or interrupt it. In a feedback network, refusing to pass harm forward changes the next state of the system. our freedom may not be unlimited, but even limited freedom can alter what happens next. Consciousness is not magic floating above physical law. It is the capacity of a living system to model possibilities, revise behavior, and ask, given what I know and what I do not know, what should I do next? To say that space-time looks inward through consciousness is a metaphor and an open question, not an experimental result. But the metaphor points towards something real in human experience. Matter has formed living systems capable of constructing partial models of the world and partial models of themselves. Those models can be wrong. They can also be corrected. Meaning may not be a hidden object waiting outside the universe. It may arise through the direction we repeatedly choose under uncertainty. Not, I am the center of reality. Not, I am nothing. But, I am a limited participant whose actions alter the relationships around me. Personal transformation is not an escape from the material world. It is the difficult work of making perception, value, action, and responsibility less contradictory over time. The older language might call this spiritual coherence. A more cautious language would call it integrity. Now we can return to the name of this series, the Wisdom Bridge. A bridge is not designed to erase the river. Science and spirituality should not be forced into one vocabulary. Physics does not need to become poetry. Poetry does not need to pretend it is an experiment. Science protects us from believing every beautiful idea. It asks for models, evidence, predictions, uncertainty, and conditions under which a claim could fail. Wisdom protects us from confusing technical power with a worthy direction. It asks what our knowledge is for, what relationships it creates, and what we are becoming through its use. The bridge must therefore contain guardrails. It is not only a passage, it is also a checkpoint. Science can correct wisdom when metaphor begins to pretend that it is mechanism. Wisdom can challenge science when technical capability begins to pretend that it is a worthy purpose. At their best, the two languages expose one another's blind spots. Where evidence ends, we must say that evidence ends. Where a statement becomes metaphor, we must name it as metaphor. Where PTQ proposes a geometric possibility, it must remain open to mathematical consistency, physical constraints, and empirical testing. And where science has not answered a question, we must resist the temptation to fill the silence with certainty. The purpose of a bridge is translation without conquest. Our models can be extraordinarily reliable, and reality may still exceed every model we build. This journey began with the silence before distinction. It moved through symmetry and duality, through resonance, structure, information, and the difficult boundary of consciousness. We did not arrive at a final theory. That was never the honest destination. What we gained was a new discipline of questioning, to ask boldly, without pretending that wonder is evidence, to test rigorously, without pretending that measurement exhausts meaning, to use technology without surrendering responsibility to the tool, and to live with uncertainty without turning uncertainty into despair. The next scientific revolution may not come from choosing between parts and wholes. It may come from learning how levels of description fit together. The next civilizational revolution may not come from greater control. It may come from understanding feedback before feedback becomes collapse. And the next personal revolution may not come from discovering that we are all powerful. It may come from accepting that our power is limited, and therefore our choices are real. We are all travelers on this bridge. Below us is the world of matter, consequence, and irreversible time. Above us is the open sky of possibility. Behind us are inherited explanations. Ahead are questions for which we do not yet have language. We do not hold the final answer, but we can become better builders, more careful with evidence, more humble before complexity, more responsible for what our tools amplify, and more honest about the direction of our own lives. In a poetic sense, when matter learns to observe, question, and correct itself, the universe has begun to form a deeper image of its own existence. Perhaps that is all the bridge can promise. Not that the universe has revealed its final meaning, but that through us, a small part of it has learned to ask more carefully.